Okay, let's try and unpack this. Over 1,000 new psychoactive substances, NPS, reported globally. That was by the end of 2021.
Yeah.
I mean, just let that number sink in for a moment. The variety is just, it's mind-boggling.
It really is.
So the immediate question, is how do we even start to figure out what's actually being used, like in communities, and what are the trends?
It was a huge challenge, definitely.
Yeah.
And the traditional ways we monitor drug use, they often struggle. They just can't keep pace with changes that happen so fast.
Right.
And that's where wastewater-based epidemiology, WBE, comes in.
Yeah.
It offers a really insightful approach.
Okay.
Think of it like analyzing a community's collective wastewater, sewage, to get this broad overview of the substances people connected to that treatment plant have consumed.
So it's like a shortcut to understanding use patterns.
Kind of, yeah. It's a way to gather information at a population level. It goes beyond just, say, self-report surveys or drug seizure data.
Exactly. It's this sort of insider view, isn't it? And that's what we're diving into today. We're looking at a pretty significant European study that used this WBE method specifically to explore these emerging NPS trends across 12 cities, 7 different countries. And our main source for this deep dive, just so you know, is the scientific paper detailing all this really expensive research.
And it's important to set the stage, I think. These new psychoactive substances, they cover a really broad range.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about things like synthetic opioids. These are raising serious concerns, mostly because of their potency.
Okay.
They're lab-made drugs, basically mimicking opioids like heroin, but often, much, much stronger.
That's the worry.
Definitely. Then there are synthetic cathinones, often called bath salts sometimes, which are more stimulant-like, and tryptamines too, a class often known for psychedelic or hallucinogenic effects. The really crucial point here is that these are often brand new to the market or rapidly changing. That makes tracking them, understanding their impact, particularly difficult.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics of this study then. What was the scope? Like, how many substances, how many people are we talking about?
Well, the scale is definitely one of the key things here.
Yeah.
It was pretty big. They analyzed wastewater samples for over 300 different NPS.
Wow, 300.
Yeah. And considering how many are known to be floating around Europe, that's a really substantial chunk to investigate.
And when did they collect these samples?
The collection period was over 4 months. Between March and June of 2021.
4 months, 12 cities. That sounds like a massive logistical effort. Where exactly were these cities?
Yeah, it was quite spread out. They covered 7 European countries. So in Belgium, they looked at Antwerp and Brussels.
Okay.
Italy had Bari, Bologna, and Milan. The Netherlands included Amsterdam, Eindhoven, and Utrecht.
Right.
Plus Krakow in Poland, Bratislava in Slovakia, Ljubljana in Slovenia, and Castellón down in Spain.
That's quite a geographical spread.
It is. And in total, the wastewater they analyzed came from treatment plants serving roughly 6.3 million people.
6.3 million. Okay.
So it gives a pretty broad view of what might be happening in those specific urban centers.
And it wasn't just about spotting if a drug was there, was it? They were measuring amounts, too.
Precisely. They used 2 main approaches. Quantitative analysis.
Okay.
Think of that as measuring how much of certain specific substances they could find. Known substances.
Right.
And then also qualitative analysis, which is more like casting a wider net, seeing what else might be present, even things they weren't specifically targeting initially.
Sort of looking for the unknowns.
Exactly. Identifying the unexpected. And, given the huge public health worries around fentanyl and similar drugs, they paid really close attention to fentanyl itself and its main breakdown product. It's metabolite norfentanyl, plus other synthetic opioids in those quantitative measurements.
Makes sense. But how reliable is this data? I mean, wastewater isn't exactly a pristine sample, is it?
That's a really critical point, and the researchers addressed it. They actually conducted stability testing.
Okay.
On the specific chemical markers, the biomarkers, they used to detect these NPS in the wastewater.
Ah, so they checked how well the evidence survives in the sewer.
Essentially, yes. It helps them understand how stable these substances are in that environment, which is, absolutely vital if you want to interpret the concentration data correctly.
Right. You need to know if what you're measuring accurately reflects what was used.
Exactly.
Okay, so they did all this careful collection, analysis, stability checks. What did they actually find? What were the big discoveries in Europe's wastewater back then?
Okay, so let's start with those synthetic opioids we mentioned. Fentanyl and its metabolite norfentanyl. They were found in many of the countries involved, which, as we kind of hinted, probably suggests use beyond just prescribed medicine.
Yeah.
Though the study can't definitively separate prescribed versus illicit use. That's important to state. But what was particularly interesting, maybe a bit unusual, was that in some places they found fentanyl itself more often and at higher concentrations than its metabolite norfentanyl.
Why is that unusual?
Well, you'd normally expect to excrete more of the metabolite after your body processes the drug. Finding more of the parent drug might suggest very recent use, maybe continuous use patterns, or perhaps even direct disposal, though that's harder to confirm. It could point to riskier scenarios.
That is a concerning detail. What about those other fentanyl analogs, the really potent ones that we sometimes hear about causing overdose spikes?
They did look for those, but the only synthetic opioid analog they actually managed to quantify to measure reliably was something called acetyl-norfentanyl.
Okay.
And that was only found in Belgium.
Only Belgium.
In this study, yes.
Yeah.
Which is kind of notable because other regions, like you hear reports from Australia, the U.S., they found a wider variety of fentanyl analogs in their wastewater studies.
So it points maybe to different synthetic opioid markets in different parts of the world?
It could well do, yeah. Potential regional variations in exactly which synthetic opioids are most common.
Right. So fentanyl and a close relative were present. What about the synthetic cathinones, those stimulant-type drugs?
Ah, yes. Synthetic cathinones actually turned out to be the most commonly detected category of NPS in this whole study.
Really? More common than the opioids?
In terms of detection frequency across the sites, yes. And one cathinone in particular, 3-MMC, really stood out.
3-MMC. I feel like I've heard of that one becoming a bigger issue recently.
You likely have. It was the most frequently found NPS overall in their samples, and it also had the highest measured amounts, what they call mass loads.
Where was it highest?
Especially high in the Netherlands, then followed by Belgium and also some of the university cities they looked at in Italy.
Interesting.
It really does seem to reflect this apparent reemergence or maybe just increasing use. It looks like a significant trend.
And did they see any patterns in when it was being used?
Yes, and this was quite striking. They observed significantly higher levels of 3-MMC detected on weekend days compared to weekdays.
Ah, the classic recreational use pattern.
It strongly suggests that, yes. Which, could have implications for things like public health messaging or resource allocation, focusing perhaps more on weekends.
And you mentioned it's become a concern for drug agencies.
Absolutely. It was actually added to the European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addictions, the EMCDDA's intensive monitoring list, right in 2021. The same time this study was happening.
Wow, perfect timing.
It really was. And since then, as of March 2023, it's been placed under international control. So this study really highlights how WBE can act as that timely signal, identifying these emerging substances that are causing concern.
So 3-MMC was the big player in the cathinone category. Any others worth noting?
Yeah, there were a couple more. METC was another cathinone they detected in most countries, except, interestingly, not in the Netherlands, where 3-MMC was so high. But interpreting METC is a bit complicated.
How's?
Well, it can actually be a breakdown product, a metabolite, of some common prescription or over-the-counter drugs. Things like ephedrine or pseudoephedrine, found in cold remedies.
Ah, so its presence doesn't automatically mean illicit cathinone use.
Exactly. There's that potential confounding factor. Then there were two others, 3-L-post-4-DMMC and 4-MEC. These were only found in single countries, Belgium and Poland, respectively.
Suggesting maybe more localized niche markets for those.
That would be the interpretation, yeah. More regional variations.
Okay, got it. Let's switch gears then to the tryptamines. These are often associated with hallucinogenic effects, right?
That's the general category, yes. And the study did find NN-DMT.
DMT?
Yeah. Found in most of the participating countries, actually. The only exception was Poland in this data set.
And does that line up with other data?
It does. It aligns pretty well with reports from the EMCDDA that noted an increase in seizures of DMT around that time.
Okay. Any other tryptamines?
They also detected 5-MeO-DMT, another well-known tryptamine, in several countries. Again, not in Poland, according to their findings, and also not detected in the Netherlands samples for this study.
Interesting differences there. What about the aryl cyclohexylamines? That includes ketamine and similar substances, I believe?
That's the class, yes. And they found 2 FDCK,
2-FDCK.
Yeah, this is an analog of ketamine. They found it in samples from Belgium and the Netherlands.
Okay.
And what's quite interesting here is that this finding suggests 2-FDCK was already circulating in Europe back in early mid-2021.
Before it became more widely reported.
Exactly. Some of the wider reports really emerged more towards late 2021 or into 2022. So this WBE data provides some earlier evidence. It supports those observations from the EMCDDA about an increasing trend in the use of ketamine and its analogs.
So the wastewater really is acting like an early warning system, catching things before they hit the headlines almost.
That's certainly one of its major strengths, yeah.
Beyond these specific substances they measured amounts for, did that wider net, the qualitative analysis, catch anything else interesting?
It absolutely did.
Yeah.
That approach allowed them to tentatively identify several other NPS.
Like what?
Well, substances like 2-PEA, also ODMT, which is interesting because that's actually a metabolite of the prescription painkiller tramadol.
Oh, right.
So its presence might be linked, at least partly, to tramadol use in the population. And another one, AMT, was found in almost all the countries they studied.
Okay.
And they also had what they call level 2 identifications, meaning they're reasonably confident but maybe need a bit more confirmation for substances like harmaline, amantadine, FMA, and Finibut.
Some names I recognize, others not so much.
Right. And what's significant is that for some of these, like Finibut and FMA, this study represents the first time they've been reported in incoming wastewater, in influent.
So again, WBE is picking up signals that align with or even predate other forms of drug intelligence.
Precisely. It supports findings from other epidemiological indicators, like seizure data or hospital reports, but often gives a broader community perspective earlier on.
Fascinating. Now, you mentioned spatial and temporal trends earlier. Can we just summarize that? Where were the hotspots, and did use change much during the week, apart from that 3-MMC spike?
Sure. So spatially, the study really confirmed higher amounts, higher mass loads of 3-MMC in the Netherlands and Belgium, reinforcing that idea of them being hotspots for its use back in 2021.
Right.
And we also saw those examples of substances with more regional patterns, like that 3-source-4 DMMC just in Belgium, 4-MEC just in Poland.
Okay.
But temporally, that weekend increase for 3-MMC was definitely the most significant finding. It was observed across most of the cities where 3-MMC was found.
And it really points towards that recreational pattern.
It really does. Interestingly, for most of the other NPS they detected and quantified, they didn't see such a strong, clear weekly variation.
So 3-MMC stood out in that regard, too?
It did.
Okay. So taking all this together, what does this study really tell us about the overall value of using WBE wastewater analysis to track these constantly shifting NPS?
Well, I think this study powerfully underscores the significant value WBE offers. It provides timely data, often faster than other methods. It's relatively cost-effective compared to, say, large population surveys, and it gives us information that complements those more traditional surveillance approaches. We get a quicker, broader understanding of what substances are actually being consumed within different communities.
And this specific research added something else too, right, about stability?
Yes, that's a key contribution. They did a lot of work checking the stability of many of these NPS markers in wastewater. That knowledge is absolutely crucial for making WBE a reliable, robust tool for ongoing monitoring. You need confidence in the measurements.
Makes sense. But I guess it's not a perfect system. There must still be challenges.
Oh, absolutely. It's not flawless.
Yeah.
One major challenge is just the sheer dynamism of the NPS market. New substances pop up constantly.
Right.
We also often lack detailed information on the metabolism of these new drugs, how the body processes them. That makes it harder to know which specific biomarkers, metabolites, or parent drugs are best to look for in wastewater.
And I suppose some might be used by very few people.
Exactly. The prevalence of some NPS might be quite low, so their concentrations in wastewater can be incredibly tiny, meaning you need really highly sensitive analytical methods to even detect them reliably.
So, given those challenges, what did the researchers recommend for the future? How can WBE be improved or better utilized in this field?
Their recommendations focus on a few key areas. First, carefully selecting the biomarkers, which substances to target. That includes considering metabolites, not just the parent drug, and importantly, factoring in how stable those markers are in the sewer environment.
Okay.
They also strongly suggest combining both approaches. The quantitative analysis, measuring specific knowns, with that broader qualitative screening to catch the unknowns.
Makes sense. Cover all bases.
Pretty much. And importantly, they call for larger scale, longer term monitoring, looking across more locations consistently over time. they use the term sentinel cities.
Like specific cities acting as watch points.
Exactly. And they emphasize the need for strong collaboration between the researchers doing the WBE and the national or international drug monitoring agencies, sharing data and insights.
Good point.
And finally, they highlight that substances which eventually come under international control, like 3-MMC now has, should absolutely be included in routine, regular WBE monitoring programs going forward.
Okay, so bringing it all together then, this deep dive into this big European study, it really gives us a fascinating snapshot, doesn't it? A picture of NPS use back in 2021.
It really does.
We saw the widespread presence of things like 3-MMC, NN-DMT. We saw that earlier signal for 2-FDCK starting to emerge, and those interesting geographical differences in what was being used where.
Yeah.
And it really just underlines the potential of wastewater analysis, WBE, as a really valuable tool, almost an early warning system for public health.
Absolutely. And hopefully for you, the listener, this has given you a focused, still pretty thorough look into what is a really complex and fast-moving area, giving you a better handle on these drug use trends without, drowning you in all the raw technical data.
Definitely. So maybe here's a final thought for you to mull over. Given this relentless pace, the constant emergence of new psychoactive substances, how can public health agencies best use these innovative tools like wastewater analysis to try and stay ahead, to proactively address potential harms and protect public health? And maybe also, what are the ethical considerations we need to think about when using this kind of community-level biological data? Lots to consider there.